In my last video, you might have seen me sneak my gripper smart hook in as I used it to make coves with my table saw. It's actually a pretty decent push block, or what I like to call a pull block, when you're pulling wood through the blade. I'll put a link for it in the description if you'd like to give it a look. But it has a few problems. First of all, it really only works well when the wood being pushed is wider than the push block, which is a problem as it is so large. The second problem, and really the problem that makes me not want to turn to it, is that I've never liked the depth of the plastic hooks as it uses a one-size-fits-all, which makes me put my concentration on it instead of the wood I'm working with. Even when I know the wood I'm pulling is thick and won't hit those hooks, the price of the unit seems to be waving at me the entire time. So today, I'm going to show you how you can make your own pull block with scrap wood and a few pieces of hardware you can get for less than a few dollars. I started this prototype out by ripping a piece of 2x4 to fit my 2.5 inch hinge. This width has a smaller footprint but really works well for me. I measured over 1 3/4 and a 1/2 inch up, diagonally connecting the lines. With the bandsaw I cut out the triangle. I marked all my holes on the first half of my hinge in the newly cut space before cutting down the overall block to 8 inches. The hinge that I bought didn't have screws that came with it, so I used some number 8s. Because my screws are a 1/2 inch long, I cut the thickness of the back flap to a 1/2 inch. That, with the hinge thickness, kept me safe from drilling completely through to attach the hinge. I made sure that I could fit a 1/2 inch dowel to the back before cutting the flap down to 2 3/4 inches. Instead of wrestling to keep the hinge in place with the flap, a little carpet tape held it where I wanted it to be. I marked and punched before drilling and screwing my screws in. Incidentally, adding a bit of tape to the drill bit will keep you from drilling too far. With my finger straight line jig, I drew a little more than a 1/2 inch. This will be where the 1/2 inch dowels will go. I used a 1/2 inch Forstner bit to mark where I'll drill. Drilling was a tedious and nail biter as I was too close to the edge. The beauty of a prototype is the ability to make a mistake and then calling it a learning moment. If you make this, make the flap longer. I fit the dowels and cut them off at about 1.5 inches. A little glue and it was good. I marked the angle of the screw I put in by putting a carpenter square on the end and moving it in about 1 1/8 inches. This is just a good line to use later when we go to drill out the hole. On the underside, I drew a straight line across and made a center mark. To give my brad point drill bits a fighting chance, I used an awl to add a point. I used 2 drill bits here, the first one being larger than the bolt head. I went down about a 1/2 inch before switching to a drill bit that was just slightly larger than the actual screw shaft. I strung a number 8 32 by 2 inch bolt through my newly added hole. Afterwards, I marked where it reached the flap, detached it from the hinge, drew my cut lines, and took it to the bandsaw. With that cut done, I reattached the flap to the hinge. With the epoxy, I permanently glued in the bolt, which will keep it from spinning as we tighten down. Now originally, I did use some extra washers, but only because of the width of my cut I made with my bandsaw. I'll touch more on that later. Now that the mechanics of the pole block worked, I moved on to the handle. The width I used was about 1 3/8 inches. I found a lid to pattern my edge before cutting it on the bandsaw. I used my fence clamp here to plane down the edges, although I probably should just use my belt sander. Sometimes it feels good to go back to the caveman era of woodworking to appreciate our power tools. With some carpet tape, I attached it at a slight angle on the top of the block. You can make it straight if you're OCD, but having the handle at an angle is more pleasant. I marked where my 1-inch dowel holes needed to be before heading to the drill press. I cut a couple 1-inch dowel rods to 3 inches with my bandsaw jig. I don't recommend cutting dowels on the bandsaw otherwise, as it can be very dangerous. The jig for cutting dowels will be in the description below. After gluing, I tap the dowels in. To keep the tips of the dowels flush with the bottom of the block, I lowered the flap until it was even with the front of the dowels and sanded it on the sander. This will make it more precise with where you want your hooks to hang down, if only by a small margin. To finish the prototype, I added some carpet tape to the bottom and added sandpaper. I'd like to add a note that this is purely a secondary measure. I wouldn't want to make a push or pull block with just sandpaper on the bottom, as it could be dangerous. What I like about this push block is that it has a smaller footprint and can easily pull a board with just one dowel. But we'll get more into that later. With the full pull block made, I'm going to share with you now the added improvements. Because showing the entire build process again with a different block is redundant and honestly would double the length of this video, I'm not going to show the entire process here. I did make a hidden build video for it that you can find either in the description or at the end of this video. One problem I found with this new push block was that even though I felt like I had an ergonomically more accurate placement of the handle, when I needed to hug the fence with the block, I found it incredibly tight. To fix that problem, I changed the way I made the handle. Instead of using dowels to hold my handle up, I instead went with a plain old rectangular block of wood cut at a 15-degree angle on the table saw. Instead of drilling from the top down, I went from the bottom up using smaller dowels. This was a much better solution. The next problem I ran into was the way it opened and closed due to the washers catching on the threads. To fix this problem, I grinded the threads by putting the bolt in my drill press and using a file. This was a really quick fix that I recommend doing. As I said earlier, I feel like I cut too much out of the flap. I instead drilled several holes out and used a file to fit the bolt better. It might be more of a cosmetic thing, but I felt like I was battling washer sizes. Not really a problem, but I wanted to get rid of the hinge and created my own hinge with my cove jig. I don't know, I kind of like the all wood feel to it now. Anyway, I thought I'd show off some more things I found to be more practical with this block. Thank you so much for watching. Besides the usual thumbs up and subscribing, I'd love to hear from you. Is this a project you think you'll make? Did I explain the steps right? I want to know. Let me hear from you. Click the video that's now on the screen to see the full build for this overly complicated pole block. Follow me on Instagram at MakeThingsWithRob, and remember to keep making things.